You ever have one of those days, the ones where you feel super busy, you're bouncing from thing to thing, but when you look back, you've made zero actual progress. It is just a frustratingly common feeling. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? Today, we're going to diagnose our workflow like an engineer would debug a system.
This quote, this just nails it, doesn't it? It perfectly captures that feeling of doing fake work. You're engaged in all this low-value activity that looks like progress, but it really isn't. It's that friction that tells us, hey, something in our execution system is broken. So how do we stop pushing the peas around and actually start getting things done?
All right, we're going to tackle this head-on with a really clear 5-part diagnostic. First, we're going to reframe the whole problem. Then we'll dive into the 3 major failure points in any project: starting, finishing, and connecting the pieces. And finally, we'll put together a practical toolkit to fix any glitches we find along the way.
So let's kick things off by just completely shifting our perspective. The core idea here is that when a project breaks down, it's not a moral failure on your part. It's a system error. Think of it like a technical glitch in your own personal workflow architecture.
This is what we call execution integrity. It means we stop blaming ourselves for a lack of willpower, and instead we start acting like a strategist, looking for the break in the wire. The moment you see unproductivity as a solvable engineering challenge, you actually regain control. So where do these glitches actually happen? Well, they usually pop up at 3 distinct points. There's initiation, which is all about just getting off the ground. Then there's completion. Can you maintain focus until a task is actually done? And finally, there's chaining, which is all about linking individual tasks together to finish a bigger project. Let's start with that first big hurdle. Okay, phase 1, the initiation threshold. This is often the hardest part, right? That moment of transition from doing nothing to doing something with intention. It's really a battle between the cues that remind us to act and our own internal resistance. Now, what's really interesting here is how failing to start breaks down into 2 totally different modes. First, you've got task blindness. This is when the commitment just completely slips your mind. Your radar doesn't even blip. But with dismissal of task, the radar does blip, you remember you're supposed to do it, but you actively, consciously choose to ignore it. 2 very different problems that need 2 very different solutions.
So to fix task blindness, you need what's called an affordance audit. An affordance is just a fancy word for any property in your environment that kind of invites you to take action. So you got to ask yourself, are there internal pings, physical objects, specific events or alarms, or even just those nagging mental prompts reminding you to act? If not, you need to build those triggers into your system. And here are some real-world examples of what those cues look like. A book on your nightstand isn't just a book. It's a trigger, a reminder to read. An alarm isn't just a sound. It's a cue for a very specific purpose. Even a quirky little family tradition can serve as a trigger to break up the monotony of a long drive. These are the things that actually make habits possible. But what if the trigger works and you hear it, you see it, and you just ignore it? Well, that's dismissal. And the fix for this is totally internal. It's a resistance audit. You have to consciously strengthen your intent, really elevate that task's importance in your mind so that it can survive your brain's natural tendency to seek comfort and avoid effort. Okay, so you've successfully started victory. But, it's kind of a hollow victory if you can't actually see it through. And that brings us to our second major failure point, actually finishing the work you started. So once you're in a work session, failure can strike in 2 ways. There's session distraction, which is pretty straightforward. You lose focus and just abandon the task. But poor performance is way more subtle. This is when you're working hard, but you're doing the wrong something, which just leads to frustration and a ton of wasted energy. So how do you fight session distraction? You do it by setting what's called a minimum synchronization threshold. It's just a tiny specific benchmark that acts as an unlock. For a writer, that could be as simple as writing just 100 words. It's not about finishing the entire article. It's just about hitting that small milestone. If you get distracted after that, your brain now has clear coordinates to come back to. And to diagnose poor performance, to see if you're just pushing peas, you ask yourself these 3 simple questions. First, is this effort actually serving my objective? Second, do I have the right skills for this specific thing? And third, would getting some expert guidance help me stop spinning my wheels? This is your gut check to make sure your effort isn't just being wasted. All right, so you can start tasks and you can even finish them. Great. The final breakdown, though, often happens when you can't connect all those individual tasks into one cohesive, finished project. And this failure also has 2 extremes.
On one end, you have undefined tasks. This is where your project is basically just a vague dream because you haven't identified the very next actionable step. But on the other end, you have task over-orientation. This is when you're so lost in planning every single tiny detail that you never actually start drafting or building or shipping the final product.
And here's the crucial point. To maintain momentum, you have to work on what's called the salient topic. That's the work that is genuinely on your mind, the problem you're truly, deeply trying to solve. When you force yourself to work on something else, you start pushing P's, your creative interest just dies, and your whole system grinds to a halt.
So we've diagnosed all the glitches. Now for the fun part, the tools to actually fix them. This is all about fueling your internal engine with intent, with energy, and with the right mindset.
So what do you do when you wake up and have absolutely zero energy? You manufacture it. This is a practical, physical protocol. First, just remember the commitment you made the night before. Then, generate some sensory input. Rub your face, slap your chest. You are literally drowning out your body's cries for comfort with a new wave of sensation to force it into an active state.
And here's the mental side of the toolkit. See, a trigger doesn't automatically lead to action. First, it creates a mental image in your head. Now, if that image is of all the hard work and the pain involved, you'll probably stay put. The key is to consciously visualize the reward, not the effort. That's how you bypass resistance.
And this chart, well, this puts it all together. It's your master diagnostic. Just find your symptom on the left, whether it's procrastination or just brain fog. The table shows you the source of that glitch and, most importantly, the specific corrective action you need to take. This is your entire workflow debugged.
Look, if you remember nothing else from this, remember these 3 rules. First, triggers are mandatory. They're non-negotiable. You have to build them into your environment. Second, always work on what's truly on your mind, the salient topic, to keep that momentum going. And third, you have to recognize that discomfort is often just a test. Learn to punch through it.
So we've run the diagnostic, you've seen the map of where things can go wrong, and you've seen the tools to fix them. The only question left is, what's the one small, corrective shift you're going to implement in your own system? Starting right now.